My name is George. This is GLLR Cars. Welcome to the channel. Today we're talking Dodge Challenger. Dodge Challenger SXT is a 3.6 liter V6 that delivers 305 horsepower. So this is not the fastest Challenger. 300 horsepower is decent power, so don't expect a great deal of performance. But for an American muscle car, it will be interesting to see how does this perform, how does it stack up in terms of speed, in terms of just how punchy the engine is if we punch it. How does it feel to drive an American muscle car, even if it's not a V8? So let's start by looking at the exterior of the Dodge Challenger. This is the Challenger. Like I said before, it does not have all of the bells and whistles of like the SRT or even the Hellcat or one of the higher end models. It does have a very nice slim nose. Even though it does have a long nose, the narrow where the lights are, I do like that look that it has. Even though it has the more traditional, to make it look retro, round lights, I do like that narrow strip that it has. This SXT does not have the hollow headlight or the front turning light that's usually hollow to allow more air for the larger V8 engine. So here it is covered. It does have a very nice front area where the fog lights are, and the grille does give it a better ground effect to the car. As we look around up in the hood, let's have these vent areas, and again, for a V6 you don't need them, but these air intakes do provide a good appeal to the look of the car. So the front profile of the car, in my view, is very attractive. The car, as a matter of fact, the side view is also very attractive. I think that the lines and look of the car, for being a muscle car, does have a very good appeal. The ratio of the length of the car and then the height. It's not a very low car, but because it's a long car, it does provide a very smooth view. For at least from this angle, it does look very good. It doesn't have a whole lot of lines in terms of style here on the side. That's not where the investment is in a car like this, but it does appeal. The wheels with the dual spokes, coming from not a high performing version of the Challenger, are still very appealing as well. The raised up, I guess, pseudo wing that they have here, this area where they raise it up, it's a very nice touch to make it look sportier. And looking at the rear lights, again, very narrow and consistent with the front, which is something that I like. So in the front, they make it very narrow, at least where the headlights are. In the rear, where the tail lights are, they also make it very narrow. And then below those reflectors is where you have those dual tailpipes, which are round, really, and it just have those covers to make it look more like the big squared off tailpipes, but functional. And if you're not looking at from this angle, you're just looking from above or a little bit from the side, you're not going to notice that either. This car is a very large car, and as such, it does have a lot of trunk space. Surprisingly though, when we look in the inside, we'll look in the back, even though it's a two-door car, it is a four-seater, but we'll look at the space inside. Again, a very large car for being a two-door sports car. To get in, the first thing to look at is the keys. Typical key fob with just the lock unlock and the trunk release button. It does have a transponder, so if you need to get in, it does have a button that if the keys are in your pocket, got the button here to lock This interior trim has a lot of hard plastic, so I didn't expect the interior to have a lot of upscale materials. Fabric and only leather on the armrest. You got your window control and your mirror controls here. It's interesting that the door release latch is all the way down here in a cup holder. The interior has a lot of fabric in it. It's not the upscale model, but it's interesting to look at this because not everybody buys the top of the line car, and if you're looking for one that has not a large engine and not a lot of interior upscale features, what would this look like? Even though it is not the top of the line, it still has at least a push button start, which is something that I like. Starting the vehicle on. It does have an instrument cluster that it is quite appealing. I do like it. It has the round analog gauges on the sides, and in the center it does have a digital display that you get to change what you want to see by just changing all the different settings and all the different views that you can from the steering wheel buttons. And again, you have a host of different information that you can scroll through, so it's very similar to other cars from the Dodge line that we've looked at. One thing that I would have preferred is the center screen to be a little bit wider, a little bit bigger, and give you a few more options. And again, it's my preference to usually make the entire screen a digital screen, and even the gauges that are analog being LCD screens. That's my preference. But nevertheless, it's functional, it's easy to see day or night, and it gets the job done. The infotainment system is the Uconnect, and the Uconnect is this one doesn't have the larger screen. It doesn't even have navigation, but it does have Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, so you can get your maps that way. It is very functional. It's got all the shortcut buttons in the bottom that you get to move around and put the ones that you want on this dock area. So very functional. In fact, I've talked about this before. The Uconnect system from Dodge, or literally from FCA, you see them on Jeep products, you see it in Dodge, you see it in Ram products. It's one of the best ones out there in terms of ease of use, functionality, etc. You got also your analog controls for your media controls and for temperature. So you can use the digital version of it, or you can use the analog if you need to get to it very quickly. The shifter is an automatic transmission car. It does have a very nice shifter where you just press the button and move it, and you have the LCD indicator that shows you in which position you are. Many more cars that they have this LCD indicator, or the little lights here where you are here on the side, so they put the little screen up here. Got a couple of cup holders here, so for a two-door sports car, that's not bad. It's got a center console that's actually quite generous. You have your 2 USB ports in there. You got your auxiliary control, and you got a 12-volt DC connector in there. So pretty big and spacious. You have a very spacious glove compartment. Again, this car being a fairly large car, you do get to have very generous space, cubby holes and places where you can store things here for your glasses. I already talked about the doors. And now let's talk a little bit about space. The comfort of the car is actually quite good. When you sit down and you adjust the chair the way that you want it, it is in the sweet spot, I would say. You get to have the right distance. You get to have both on your feet as well as over where the steering wheel is. So it is quite good. And in the front, at least, is very spacious. So you have it is a very wide car. So your passenger, if you can see, I extend my hand fully and I can only get to about half of the other side. So for a passenger, it's very comfortable. The center console where the storage is, which doubles as an armrest, it's also very wide. So if you put your arm in here, and I'm only using about half of it, you still have room for your passenger to put their arm, and you still have plenty of space. And a pet peeve of mine is whenever you're driving and your driving position allows you to grab the wheel and still rest your elbow, it does work for me. So I can do that and still put my elbow on the armrest and still grab the wheel at the 3 o'clock position. And when it comes to that, it really have no complaints there. For a car this big and generous in space, there really aren't going to be any shortcomings when it comes to comfort. Now let's talk a little bit about the back seat though. Looking at the back seat, this chair is on my driving position, and what I'm left with here is roughly about 3 to 4 inches of space for me to get in here. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to do that anyway, and just to see what it's like to climb in the back seat of a car like this. Barely get my feet right under that. Once I sit down, if I need to move the chair back, I use this latch that's up here to be able to move it forward or back. And right there, yes, I can fit, but I would probably say that it's not a place that I would want to spend a whole lot of time here. So for a two-door sports car, as many two-door sports cars that are out there, don't use the back seat unless you really need to, unless it's an emergency, you need to get someone back here, or maybe if it's a child. The one thing that surprises me about this car, it is a very large car, so I would expect that the back seat would be a lot more generous in space. That's not the case. So where does all the space go? Maybe part of it goes to the front, part of it most likely goes to the trunk area. Now to open the trunk, there's two ways to do that. You can either use the key fob and press the trunk release button, or you can press a button that's right above where the name Dodge is up here. There's a tiny button here. To press that, and the keys are in your pocket, it does release the trunk, and then you get to look at the trunk. Again, very big trunk and generous in space. The one thing I want to point out though is that although the loading area is top loading, so you have to lift to get to it, look at the distance here between the mouth of the opening of the trunk and the back of the bumper. This is like a good 10 inches. Interestingly, it's something that I don't see in many other cars, and maybe because it's a sports car and the way it was designed, it's not meant to be very practical, but the trunk is very generous. If you look at the trunk space, you can easily put three golf bags in there, and you'll still have spare space in there. So looking at the overall layout of the vehicle and where does some of the space go, it's probably safe to say that between the front driver's side area and the front seat area and the trunk area, that's what uses up the most space on this car, and very little was left for the back seats. But again, this is a sports car, I wouldn't expect it, but for a car this size, I figured it probably should have been a little bit bigger. First impressions, the acceleration is extremely punchy. So when you punch it, without any doubt, this car will punch you back. And it is meant to be loud. It is meant to be very powerful engine. And you meant to feel it. They do it in such a way that you meant to feel it. So the performance, at least in a straight line, is quite rewarding. Yeah, make no mistake, it really does punch, and it really does set you back on your seat. So if you're looking for acceleration performance, this car has it. It is a big car, it is a heavy car, yet it still doesn't feel like a heavy car because the acceleration is such that it negates the weight of the car. When it comes to the steering, it does have a little bit of a wide turn circle, a wide turn angle. The steering is not as stiff as I would like it. I think it is a balance between, or is a trade-off between a mushy steering feel and a stiff feel of the steering wheel. So not my first choice, but unless you really are very picky about your steering wheel being a very precise steering, this car will get it done. This car is all about raw power and straight acceleration. When it comes to the handling, it's not as good handling. It does you do tend to feel the weight when you make a turn, and it does remind you that it's not really a great handling vehicle. But again, if you want something that's great handling, you're going to pay a lot more. If you want the power and you don't want to pay a great deal of money, then this vehicle is for you. The Dodge Challenger is an interesting car in that although it is a two-door muscle car, it is a very large car. So for the size of this car, it could easily be a four-door car. So it's just a matter of taste on what a driver may like. I think if they're going to make a two-door car, it is a four-seater. It doesn't really need to be this big. If you wanted a more practical car, there's cars for that. But again, it does do fairly well, and many people like the car. In my opinion, I would prefer if it were a little bit smaller, and maybe even a two-seater. It would be a fun two-seater. In terms of the visibility of the car and your view from the front seat, it is a fairly good view. The car does not really have big windows, but the way that it's laid out, as I look around and I look at all the glasses, all the small windows around me, it's a very good view. I think that the contrast to something like this would be something like a Chevy Camaro that is known for having bad visibility. The dashboard is not particularly high. So if I look at the dashboard, it's somewhat low, maybe not as low as the Ford Mustang, but lower than I expected, and does give you good visibility. I don't have the chair raised all the way up. As a matter of fact, I like to lower my seating position so that my head is not all the way up against the ceiling. I like a low position, and I take that back. I didn't have the chair all the way down, so I lowered it all the way down, and I still have, this is what my visibility would be. It's still very good visibility. So kudos to Dodge for doing a good job and at least overcoming that common issue where some sports cars really don't have good visibility. In terms of the layout of the gauges and the media controls and the position of the temperature controls and such, it is well laid out. I like it in that it is easy to reach. The controls are easy to read. In this case, the instrument cluster, the infotainment system with the Uconnect, and then the temperature controls and volume controls and such for media. They're all easy to reach, yet it is not as driver-centric in that it is easily accessible to the passenger of the car. So again, fairly good job. I do like cars that make it available for the passenger to enjoy some of the technology and some of the visibility to the data, like the gauges and the maps and things of that nature. What will be a contrast to this? It is an exotic car, but a contrast to this is the Audi R8, where not even maps are available, at least not in the latest one. There's no maps available in the center console. The maps are presented to you on the instrument cluster, is what they call the virtual cockpit. All other Audis do have a corresponding map system in the center stack, but the R8, they decided to remove it, so it's only available to the driver. Again, no need to really compare a Dodge Challenger to an Audi R8, but just trying to illustrate that how you lay out the visibility of the data, the visibility of your infotainment, maps, gauges, whatnot. It is, for me, a bonus when an automaker makes it available to the passenger to be able to get some of that additional information from their position, from their seat. When it comes to the transmission, one thing to point out, this is an automatic transmission. It doesn't have, for a car that has this level of performance, it doesn't have paddle shifters. So they manual mode on the transmission is more like a regular sedan, where you put the shifter. I can show you right here. You can put the shifter into manual mode, and then you get to shift plus and minus that way. It's not my preferred style if you have a car with this performance. One thing to point out about the automatic transmission is that when you're driving it hard, the automatic transmission will shift down to give you more power, but it doesn't shift back up at the right time. So what I've seen is that when you let go of the accelerator a little bit, the gear in which it is stays a little bit in a low gear. You actually lose some of that momentum that you already have when you're accelerating it. So just keep that in mind. Again, a way to overcome this would be to use the manual mode, although it doesn't have paddle shifters, but that will give the driver more control of when the shifting should go back up. The Dodge Challenger SXT is a very fast car. It's a fun car to drive. I know that it's a car that is fast. Maybe it doesn't handle as well. Maybe it's not as good on turns, but if you're driving it around, you want a fun car to drive that's not going to break the bank. The Dodge Challenger is a surprisingly good, fun car to drive. With the V6 engine, 3.6 liter, and 305 horsepower, for a car this big, it moves it, and it moves it good. So if you want a car that you want to enjoy, a sports car, and it's categorized as typical American muscle car, what better way to have fun than to drive a Ford Challenger SXT? The Ford Challenger SXT is a car that I would only make a few subtle differences in terms of the packages that I would get. So if I cannot afford the V8, if I could afford the V8, I would get the V8. If I couldn't, and I need to make sure that I can have a nice ride, I would probably get this V6 because you can still enjoy it. It still has some punch. But then I would make the upgrades to the larger infotainment, the leather seats, and maybe a different color. This is not my preferred color, but other than that, maybe you can customize it with some wheels and whatnot, but it's a very nice car. I highly recommend it. My name is George. This is GLLR Cars, and as always, drive safe.